before we can move into kindness. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abounding in kindness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but by no means clearing the guilty, rather visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So as we study the divine nature, specifically because we are to walk in that nature for his glory and for his name's sake. I think it's fun to read the attributes of God, especially the ones that he speaks regarding himself, and then look for how it looks as he walks it out. So he says specifically about himself that he's patient, long-suffering, and slow to anger. So an example or examples that you can think of in the Old Testament, let's talk specifically of when God is slow to anger. Any come to mind? What's that? Anytime in the Old Testament, when the divine nature of God is put on display, and specifically his attributes of being slow to anger and long-suffering, when is that walked out? Can you think of any stories in which he walks that out? What's that? Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Any others come to mind?
You said
The Exodus?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All the time. Yep. So when I thought about that this morning, the first thing I thought about was the golden calf fiasco. So what happened in that story? Yeah, fiasco. What happened in that story? I think it's in Exodus 30 or 32. So okay, Moses is on the mountain.
They decide they're going to worship God there.
Okay. The children of Israel, they start missing Moses. They're not certain whether or not he's coming back. They're kind of at a loss for leadership, and they decide they're going to revert back to what they've always known. Right? So they forge a golden calf. Why would they have done that? Because that's what they learned in Egypt. So they went back to the gods of their previous captivity. And when they forged that golden calf, what did they endeavor to do with it? Pray to it and use it to worship God. Exactly. Right? Why would this upset the God of the Bible? Because he already told them specifically, you are not make me to be with anything. And why is that? Because the God of the Bible is the one true and living God. And he is passionate about his realness, and he is passionate about his holiness. And so to mix him, combine him, or join him to anything false or fake or even man-made, he prohibits. Right? So they weren't They weren't. They were specifically breaking a commandment that he told them already. Right? So he comes down and sees them connecting him to something fake, and his first statement to Moses is what? Leave me alone so that I can burn against these people, so that my wrath can burn against them. Right? And Moses does what? Moses intercedes. Right? Moses calls upon his attributes of long-suffering and patience and being slow to anger. And so God relents. Right? And I make this point for a couple of reasons. One, because anger is not only a part of the divine nature, it is actually a necessary component of real love. Anger is. And had God not been slow to anger, right? What would the result have been of the golden calf experience? Moses is the only one left. That's what God was going to do. Right? If God was not slow to anger, if God just would have reacted in anger, just Moses lives. But God was slow to anger. And in that pause, what happened? You can all read this in Exodus 32, by the way. I'm not making this up.
3,000 men were slain.
Okay? Why?
Decisions had to be made.
Decisions were made. In his slowness to anger, God pauses and says, all right, Moses, I'll give you an opportunity to lead these back to me. Lead these people back to me. They got to repent and they got to return to me. And if they side with you, more importantly, me, then they can live. Right? And at that point, at that moment of decision, 3,000 decided that they weren't going to return and they all died. Right? So this is something that I think is extremely beneficial for us to know, that God's wrath and his anger poured out specifically on sin is very often, as example throughout the entire story, by letting people live the way they choose to live and then allowing the consequence to come, specifically the consequences of sin to come as a form of his judgment and punishment. That makes sense? What we need to recognize is that anger that God would allow the consequence to come when we sin, that anger is an act of love. That allowing of the consequence is an act of love, right? And it's really parenting 101. You know, you can. I know. Diane and I have said it often. You can choose your behavior, but you do not get to choose the consequence of your actions. That's going to happen. It is the reaping what we sow truth that God allows. It is a part of his love, a part of his discipline, a part of his wrath, a part of his anger, a part of the divine nature to correct in this way. Everyone tracking with me? It is a part of God's nature to allow us to suffer when we when we are out of alignment. And that becomes very valuable when we start getting honest with ourselves. Right? And actually have the courage to look in the mirror when our life is a wreck. Because if your life is a wreck and bad fruit is being produced, we need to recognize that we are reaping what we are sowing, and we need to dig to expose what is the root of that fruit. right? And it can be you generally, my life is a train wreck, or it can be in a very specific area of life that just constant bad fruit is perpetual. It's an act of God's love that he's allowing you to feel that, suffer that.
Eric, is it appropriate to make the connection at the point of creation when God invited us into the business of creation, like naming, we're not, that the very essence of what happened with the cat was, you're right, God could have said, no, I'm not gonna slow down. He could have just said, you know what, Moses, you know what Eric's talking about?
Yep.
I got this, but he didn't. He allowed that co-decision to happen
Yep.
with Moses, in essence establishing the concept of slow down.
Absolutely. So we need to become experts at judging fruit. That starts with just courage and honesty. If you can start doing this as a couple, it's incredibly valuable. We recognize that this is critical to sanctification, critical to maturation. God chastens and disciplines and rebukes those he loves. Right? So anger is a necessary aspect of the divine nature. I feel like I feel like I'm kind of beating this drum hard because as we begin to talk about forgiveness and kind of specifically, I think we can abandon anger and start falling into the wrong kind of love, worldly love. And it's difficult for us. It's difficult for the church to recognize that anger is at times the most appropriate response. That anger is at times absolutely necessary. That anger at times is the purest expression of love. What the Lord is showing us right now is how to be slow to anger, because it's only when we are slow to anger and is not a reaction, but rather the appropriate response, that's the time when it's going to be walked out the right way. So last week the connection was one of the best ways to be slow to anger, or one of the best practices to be slow to anger, is to forgive. All right, and the scriptures are many that essentially say, well, actually, let's read these two real quick. They're just quick verses that make a simple point that we might as well read them and be sanctified by the truth. Someone got one of those?
And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you.
Okay. Next one. Anyone find Colossians 3:13?
3:13. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another, if any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do you.
Okay, so the instruction is simple. We forgive because God forgave us. That makes sense, and we get that. But there's deeper aspects to this that I feel like I'm just in the process of learning right now. And one of them is God's slowness to anger and his willingness to forgive is a part of his divine nature, right? So any aspect of his divine nature, we have to recognize that for us to be faithful witnesses, we have to walk in it as well. Spirit empowered, impossible but by the Spirit, witness is gonna mimic all these attributes of God. So because God forgave us, we should forgive others. That it's beyond that. This is just a part of who He is, so therefore it's a part of us and the life we're called to display. And it's all for His glory and for His name's sake. So the two examples of forgiveness that we talked about last week were Jesus on the cross and Stephen being stoned. And both powerful examples because both do a really good job of erasing the primary reasons why we typically withhold forgiveness. Anyone in here ever withhold forgiveness? Why? Pride? Why else? Fear? Anger? Hurt? Revenge? It's
Your inability to do it without God.
it's justified. Impossible without God.
All those go back to prayer.
Yeah. So we'll come up with lots of good reasons to not forgive. Right? The three that I mentioned were frequency of offense, severity of offense, and then time in which everything else that just got mentioned manifests. You know, we talk ourselves into all those all those reasons. Stephen's example and Jesus' example are so powerful because severity of offense is removed, right? They're literally in the process of being murdered. Frequency of offense, the word says that Christ's sacrifice was the atonement for every sin. There is no limit. He told Peter 70 times 7, there is no limit. And regarding time, the main takeaway from last week that the Lord was teaching me was they allowed no time to pass. So specifically, they forgave while the offense was taking place. We discussed this as a family a bunch this week, and just talked about what a powerful protector that practice would be from what happens during the time in between the offense and if we forgive. So in Matthew 5:21 through 26, if someone wants to read that real quick, two things that I just want to point out, and then I'm going to be done.
5:21.
Yep, 5:21 through 26. It's not a teaching specifically about forgiveness, but obviously it's an aspect to the teaching that fits perfectly. But I want to make one specific point. So someone let's read that real quick, and then I'll make my point.
You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Rakal, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge. The judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of that till you have paid the last penny.
What do you think is meant by verse 26?
26.
Thoughts?
You stop there until you forgive.
And until you forgive,
You're holding up your own prayers. You're having a conversation. Like the Pharisee, he prayed thus with himself.
it ends. Surely I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny. And then look at how the actual specific teaching on forgiveness that we looked at last week in Matthew 18, it ends, and because the servant refused to forgive the one that owed him, he said, and his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due him. There's a connection that I feel like Yeshua makes regarding forgiveness, that until you forgive, or if you don't forgive, it's going to cost you everything. And that's there's a cost to holding on to offense. We've all experienced it. I mean, you don't even have to teach any more than that, because we have all experienced the cost of unforgiveness. It takes from us. And if the scriptures, I don't believe Yeshua is exaggerating when he says it's going to cost you everything. So to forgive, during the offense, because that's what God did for us, because it's an aspect of his divine nature, because it's an impossible but by the Spirit witness, because it prevents us from being quick to anger, because it prevents us from all the costs associated with the lack of forgiveness. All of those reasons communicate why this is so critical, why this is so important. But today I got to make one specific point that my hope is will really set the stage for an understanding of what happens when we are slow to anger and the opportunity that it creates. So basically what we said last week was, if we forgive during the offense, it creates sort of this space of time and it's during that space and time where where patience gives way to the next thing in the list, both in all the descriptions of God as well as in the list from 1 Corinthians 13, and that is kindness, right? It's also listed right after the fruits of the Spirit go patience and kindness. So there's very clearly a connection between these two, and this is something that I feel like a little bit of the why. So 2 or 3 weeks ago, we mentioned that this agape love that we're called to walk in is the tip of the spear. Now, that was actually going all the way back to the divine nature messages that we were going through in 2 Peter. Remember, the last thing is love. In love is this agape love. It's the tip of the spear for the work of the Father in the earth, as exampled most specifically by Jesus. Right? His work on the cross was the ultimate example of and expression of agape love, was it not? It was an act of purpose, an act of intention. It was not a response. It was not emotion. It was an act of obedience specifically and sacrificially for his enemies. And the author of 1 John said that destroyed the work of the enemy, right? So if agape love is the tip of the spear and it is the thing that destroys the works of the enemy, now go back to Jesus telling Peter that the church, that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Matthew 16, I think it is. And what we mentioned in that statement is that gates are defensive measures, right? The church does not have the gates. Hell has the gates. Hell is what's on the defensive right now. And why is that? Because the church is supposed to be on the offensive, right? That's how that teaching gets twisted all the time. We tend to think the church is defending against hell. That's not what Jesus says. Hell is defending against the church, right? But Jesus says that the gates of hell will not prevail. So the weapon of the church, the weapon of the set-apart family, the weapon of the individual faithful witness is this agape love. It is the tip of the spear, and it is intended to attack and storm and overcome the gates of hell. Everyone tracking with me? So Jesus warns that in the last days, because of an increase in lawlessness, the love of many will grow cold. Right? So we are being shown how to protect against the love growing cold. Right? And specifically the two paths that we have highlighted that we cannot take, that we have no permission to take, is one, the path of compromise, which we just participate in the lawlessness, and two is the path of cutting out, in which we wall off from the lawlessness. Can't do either of those, so we have to remain in the world, which brings this full circle. So because we are going to remain in the world, offense is coming, right? If offense is coming, is hell involved? Right? Almost always the case. I think what the Lord is trying to show us is that the flesh response to offense, the flesh response to lawlessness, the flesh response to the things that divide, the things that hurt, the things that that are promised, the flesh response is to avoid those situations. So we either avoid with compromise or we avoid with cutting out. I think what the Lord is showing us is that we should actually specifically see those opportunities as targets, because the enemy's there. And if we begin to see whoever is coming against us, whoever is offending us, whoever is cheating us, whoever is lying to us, whoever is hurting us in some way, if we can get to the point where we have already decided to forgive while the offense is happening, we create an opening or an opportunity. And in that opportunity, we are to recognize that it is agape love that defeats the work of the enemy that's at play in that moment, and that the specific, the word that the scriptures use over and over and over as to what we are to do in that moment is exhibit kindness. Anyone do a study on kindness yet? You want to say? We are not going to get to it yet. So if anyone else would like to join Diane in her aggressive pursuit of understanding kindness, it's unbelievable what kindness is. It's unbelievable how lacking kindness is. It's unbelievable how necessary kindness is. It's unbelievable how, if the body of Christ would walk in kindness, especially when the enemy is at work, especially when someone is deceived, especially when someone is lost, especially when someone is hurting, especially when someone is in idolatry, especially when someone is in sin, if we will walk out kindness in that moment, what can happen? Powerful, powerful, powerful what can happen. We got to stay off anger, right? As a reaction, because we won't walk in kindness if we're angry. Reactionary angry. If I don't want to specifically say what this kindness is or taint anyone's study. So please this week study kindness. Biblical kindness, do word studies, do strong studies, look at the original language, look at examples, anything you can do to, we got to combat the world's false version of kindness, because it is almost the exact opposite of what's necessary. It's almost the exact opposite of what is called kindness, right? You will find a strong connection to the truth, and it is, well, I'll just leave it at that. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to go back real quick just to the story of the guy that got forgiven.
Yep.
And went out and started collecting debts.
Yeah.
I've always read that and had sort of the lens of what an idiot.
Mm.
What a fool, right? And I finally saw it for what he really means and realized I'm a fool.
Mm.
Right? You know, it's about forgiveness. And it's about sort of like elevating yourself above others.
Yep.
You know, sort of like thinking you're so good. And anyway, it hit pretty hard, right? Because I'm the idiot.
Yep. And when, by the way, when the forgiveness is not immediate, I don't know if anyone else could share this, but this is certainly my testimony. When the forgiveness is not immediate, the longer the stretch of time, the more time takes place, the more I can talk myself out of it. For all the reasons that make my flesh feel right. Right? And that's why I think the teaching is so important. If you don't forgive now, it's just going to cost you everything. Cost you what? Time, energy, peace, relationships, distractions. You know, there's so much that it costs if we're not immediate with it. And that is not, by the way, and the kindness that follows forgiveness is not what you think it is. Meaning, it just lets it go. It condones it. It enables the sin to continue, or the offense to continue, or the wrong to continue. Biblical kindness doesn't do any of those things. It just can't be walked out in reactionary anger. You can cover it. Yes, ma'am.
John Bevere wrote